I looked at my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror, but I didn't recognize the woman staring back. I was draped in emerald silk and diamonds that cost more than my father's house, yet I felt like a prisoner dressed for an execution. For 3 years, I've been the ghost of the Sterling family. I was the small-town girl who married Julian Sterling, the heir to a shipping empire. The media called it a fairy tale. I called it a slow-motion car crash. The bedroom door creaked open. I didn't have to turn around to know it was Victoria, my mother-in-law. I could smell her expensive, suffocating perfume before she even spoke. "Stand still, Elena," she said, her voice like a razor blade wrapped in velvet. She stepped behind me and adjusted the necklace around my throat, tightening it just enough to make it hard to swallow. "Tonight is the Sterling vein merger. $2 billion are at stake. Do try to remember that you are here as an ornament, not a participant. Don't speak, don't offer your opinions, and for heaven's sake, keep that common accent of yours in check." I stared at her in the mirror. I wanted to tell her that I knew the truth. I knew that the merger was a fraud, built on forged signatures and offshore accounts. I had the evidence tucked away in a small black folder, hidden in the lining of my vanity, but I just lowered my eyes. I was playing a game she didn't even know had started. "I understand, Victoria," I whispered. We walked down the grand staircase together. The ballroom was a sea of tuxedos and couture gowns. Hundreds of elite guests were sipping champagne under crystal chandeliers that cost more than a year of my college tuition. Julian was at the center of the room, surrounded by cameras and powerful men. When he saw me, he didn't smile. He just checked his watch. "You're late," he muttered. As I reached his side, he didn't even look at my face. He just checked to see if I was wearing the family jewels. "Stay close to Mother. The governor's arriving, and we need to look like a united front." I felt a cold shiver go down my spine. Julian used to be the man who promised to protect me from his family. Now, he was just their most loyal soldier. I subtly touched the side of my dress, feeling the edge of the documents I had managed to retrieve earlier. I had a plan. At 9 p.m., I was supposed to meet Marcus, an undercover investigator from the SEC who was attending the gala as a guest. All I had to do was hand him the folder. But Victoria was watching me like a hawk. Every time I tried to move toward the balcony to find Marcus, she or her daughter, Chloe, would intercept me with a fake smile and a tight grip on my arm. "Elena, darling," Chloe chirped, her eyes cold as ice. "You have a smudge on your hem. How embarrassing. Come with us to the service area. We'll help you fix it before the press sees." "I'm fine, Chloe, it's nothing," I started to say, but Victoria's hand clamped down on my elbow. "It wasn't a request, dear," Victoria whispered. They led me through the heavy oak doors, away from the music and the laughter. We walked down a long industrial hallway where the air was cold and smelled of floor wax. We stopped in front of the walk-in pantry, a massive steel-reinforced room used for storing the mansion's expensive vintage wines. "In you go," Victoria said, giving me a sudden, violent shove. I stumbled, my heels sliding on the polished floor as I fell into the dark pantry. Before I could even turn around, the heavy steel door slammed shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Clang! I heard the sound of a heavy metal padlock clicking into place. "Victoria, open this door," I screamed, lunging at the door and pounding my fists against the cold metal. I pressed my face against the small wired glass slit in the door. Victoria was standing there, calmly smoothing her hair. "The announcement starts in 30 minutes, Elena," she said, her voice muffled but clear. "You've been a glitch in our system for far too long. Stay here and think about the divorce papers that will be waiting for you tomorrow morning. You're done." I watched as they turned and walked away, their footsteps fading into the distance. I was trapped in a room meant for cold storage, surrounded by bottles of wine and silence. They thought they had finally silenced me. But they forgot one thing. I was the one who knew where all the bodies were buried. And tonight, I was going to dig them up. The silence inside the pantry was absolute, broken only by the low mechanical hum of the industrial cooling system. I stood there for a long moment, my forehead pressed against the cold steel of the door. My breath hitched in my chest, a mixture of panic and pure, unadulterated fury. Outside those walls, my life was being dismantled. Within 30 minutes, Julian would stand on that podium, the merger would be finalized, and the Sterling name would become an untouchable fortress. I would be discarded, erased from their history like a typo. I lunged at the door again, throwing my entire weight against it. "Is anyone there?" "Open the door," I screamed, the sound bouncing off the shelves of vintage Bordeaux and gourmet spices. But I knew the layout of this mansion. The service kitchen was built with soundproofing to ensure the help never disturbed the peace of the elite. My voice was being swallowed by the very luxury that had become my prison. I sank to the floor, the emerald silk of my dress pooling around me. I looked at my hands. They were shaking. Not with fear, but with a cold, burning clarity. Victoria called me a glitch. Julian treated me like a malfunctioning accessory. They thought because I grew up in a world of hourly wages and calloused hands, I wouldn't know how to fight back in a world of crystal and linen. They were wrong. In my world, when something breaks, you don't call a servant. You fix it yourself. I stood up and scanned the room. My eyes landed on the ventilation duct near the ceiling. It was small, barely 14 inches wide, covered by a heavy iron grate. I dragged 2 heavy wooden crates of wine to the wall, stacking them with trembling hands. I kicked off my heels, feeling the bite of the cold floor on my bare feet. I climbed up, the crates groaning and wobbling under my weight. I reached for the vent. The screws were old, rusted by the humidity of the refrigeration. I didn't have a screwdriver, but I had the Sterling family crest pinned to my chest, the heavy silver brooch Victoria had forced me to wear to look the part. I ripped it off, the sharp pin digging into my thumb and drawing blood. I didn't flinch. I jammed the thick silver pin into the slot of the screw and twisted with everything I had. My muscles screamed. The silver bent, but the screw groaned and turned. 1, I whispered, the sweat dripping into my eyes. 2. The muffled sound of an orchestral fanfare started to leak through the vents. They were starting the ceremony. I worked faster, my fingernails breaking as I pried the grate loose. Finally, with a sharp metallic snap, the cover came off. The duct was dark and smelled of dust and old grease. It was a tight squeeze. But the stress of living in this house had made me thinner than I'd ever been. I reached into the hidden pocket of my dress and grabbed the black folder. That was my weapon. I wasn't leaving it behind. I pulled myself up into the narrow metal tunnel, the rough edges tearing at the silk of my dress and scratching my shoulders. I didn't care about the pain. Every inch I crawled through the darkness was an inch closer to their downfall. I followed the vibration of the bass, the sound of Julian's voice now echoing through the ventilation system. He was giving the opening speech. He sounded so confident, so noble, talking about integrity and family legacy. I reached a second vent that looked down into the main hallway, tucked just behind the grand staircase. I kicked the grate outward. It fell onto the plush red carpet with a soft thud. I dropped down, landing in a crouch. I stood up and looked at myself in the hallway mirror. My dress was ruined, my hair was a mess of dust and cobwebs, and blood was smudged across my shoulder. I didn't look like a Sterling wife anymore. I looked like the woman who was about to burn their empire to the ground. I grabbed the folder, wiped the dust from my face, and walked toward the light of the ballroom. The double doors of the ballroom stood like the gates of a fortress. Behind them, Julian's voice was reaching a crescendo, met with rhythmic bursts of applause. I stood in the shadows of the hallway for a heartbeat, clutching the black folder against my chest. I could feel the grit of dust on my skin and the warm trickle of blood on my shoulder, but the adrenaline had turned my fear into something cold and crystalline. I didn't try to fix my hair. I didn't try to hide the rips in my emerald dress. I wanted them to see exactly what they had tried to do to me. I pushed the doors open. The transition from the cold, dark hallway to the blinding light of the ballroom was jarring. The scent of lilies and expensive cologne hit me like a wall. No one noticed me at first. All eyes were on the stage where Julian stood, flanked by Victoria and the CEO of Vane Shipping. They were holding gold-plated pens, ready to sign the documents that would tether our lives to their lies forever. And so, Julian projected, his voice smooth as silk, this merger represents more than just business. It represents the strength of the Sterling legacy, a legacy built on trust. I started walking. My bare feet made no sound on the plush carpet, but as I moved past the peripheral vision of the guests, heads began to turn. The whispers started like a ripple in a pond. "Is that Elena?" Look at her dress. What happened? I saw Victoria before she saw me. She was standing on the edge of the stage, her chin tilted high, wearing a smirk of total victory. Then her eyes shifted to the back of the room. Her smirk didn't just fade, it curdled. Her face went ashen, her hand instinctively flying to the emeralds at her throat. She whispered something to the security guard standing near the stairs, pointing frantically in my direction. Two large men in black suits began to move toward me. I didn't run, I didn't hide. I scanned the crowd, my eyes searching for the one face that mattered. And then I saw him. Marcus. He was standing near the champagne fountain, his expression unreadable, but his eyes were locked on the folder in my hand. The first guard reached me, his hand moving to grab my arm. "Ma'am, you need to come with us. You're clearly unwell." "Touch me," I said, my voice low and vibrating with a threat I didn't know I possessed. "And I will scream loud enough to ruin every camera angle in this room. Is that what Victoria wants? A scene on the national news?" The guard hesitated. That second of doubt was all I needed. I dodged past him, weaving through the stunned socialites. I was 10 feet from Marcus when Chloe stepped into my path. Her face was a mask of panicked rage. "You little brat," she hissed, trying to block my way with her massive couture gown. "You were supposed to stay in that hole. Security! Get her out of here!" "Move, Chloe," I said, stepping right into her space, "or I'll tell everyone in this room exactly why you spent 3 months in rehab in Switzerland last year." We both know it wasn't for exhaustion. She flinched, her mouth hanging open, and I shoved past her. Julian had stopped speaking. The silence in the ballroom was deafening. He was staring at me from the podium, the gold pen trembling in his hand. "Elena?" he stammered into the microphone, the sound echoing through the hall. "What are you doing? You're a mess." I reached Marcus. He didn't say a word. He just looked at the blood on my shoulder and then at the folder. I didn't hand it to him yet. I turned around to face the stage, to face the man I thought I loved and the woman who tried to bury me alive. Victoria was walking down the steps of the stage now, her heels clicking like a countdown. "Elena, dear, you've clearly had a breakdown," she said, her voice loud enough for the guests to hear, projecting a fake motherly concern. "The stress of the gala. It's too much for someone of your background. Let's go upstairs and get you cleaned up." She reached out to grab the folder, her eyes screaming a warning. But I stepped back, holding the documents high above my head so the photographer's flashes caught the confidential stamps on the pages. "I'm not going anywhere, Victoria," I said, my voice ringing out clearly through the silent room. "You locked me in a pantry to keep me from this meeting. But you forgot that I'm the one who handles the archives. You didn't just lock away a glitch. You locked away the only person who is willing to keep your crimes a secret." I turned to Marcus and pressed the folder into his hands. "Everything is in there," I told him. "The offshore accounts, the forged signatures, and the logs of the private calls made from this house to the vein board. All of it." The room erupted. The silence that followed my words wasn't empty. It was heavy, like the air before a massive storm. Then the flashbulb started. 100 tiny explosions of light caught the terror on Victoria's face and the pathetic, mouth-agape shock on Julian's. Marcus opened the folder. He didn't need to read every page. He just saw the official bank seals and the signature logs. He looked up at the security guards who were still hovering near me. "I am Special Agent Marcus Thorne with the SEC," he said, his voice cutting through the murmurs of crowd. He pulled a badge from his inner pocket. "These documents are now federal evidence. Nobody moves." Victoria tried to laugh. That high, aristocratic cackle that used to make me shrink. "This is a joke. This girl is a commoner with a vivid imagination. Those papers are forgeries." "Then why did you lock me in the pantry to stop me from delivering them, Victoria?" I asked, stepping closer to her. The guests were leaning in now, their phones out, recording every second of her downfall. "You told me I was a glitch, but a glitch is just a sign that the system is broken. And your system? It's rotten to the core." I turned to Julian. He was shaking. He looked at the gold pen in his hand as if it were a poisonous snake. "Elena, we can talk about this. We're family." "We were never family, Julian," I said, the words feeling like a weight lifting off my soul. "I was a cover story. I was the girl next door you used to make your father's crooked business look wholesome." You didn't love me. You loved the silence you thought you bought with that diamond ring. The CEO of Vane Shipping, the man who was supposed to be their partner, stepped away from the podium as if the Sterling family had caught the plague. The merger is off, he declared, his voice trembling with legal fear. Vane Shipping has no knowledge of these irregularities. That was the final blow. The $2 billion legacy vanished in a single sentence. Julian collapsed into the chair behind him, his head in his hands. Victoria stood frozen, her empire crumbling in the glow of 1,000 smartphone screens. The police, who were already stationed outside for security, began to enter the room, led by Marcus's team. I didn't stay to watch the handcuffs. I had seen enough of this house to last a lifetime. I walked toward the grand entrance, my bare feet steady on the marble. As I reached the heavy oak doors, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Marcus. You realize what happens now, Elena? He asked quietly. The assets will be frozen. The mansion, the cars, the jewelry. You won't have any of it. I looked down at my ruined emerald dress, at the blood on my skin and the dust on my toes. I thought about the cold, dark pantry, and the way the air felt when I finally kicked that vent open. I grew up with nothing, Marcus, I said, a small, genuine smile finally touching my lips. I'm much better at being poor than they will ever be. Besides, I didn't do this for the money. Then why did you do it? Because they thought they could lock me away and wait for me to disappear, I replied. I just wanted to make sure that when I left, I took the walls with me. I stepped out onto the grand driveway. The night air was cool and crisp, smelling of rain and freedom. I didn't call a limo. I didn't call a driver. I just started walking toward the gate, leaving the sirens and the screaming behind me. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't a Sterling. I was just Elena. And Elena was finally going home.